Welcome to the #1 podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
Just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're gonna lose. Coming down the stretch, you're gonna lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod. Here to continue our march to the Big Ten. Today as we continue with the up-and-coming Big Ten team, the number 11 Nebraska Cornhuskers. Now that Hoiberg has taken the Huskers to the promised land, can he make a run or at least win a game in the tourney? Before we start, just a quick word of thanks to all who support the show through one-time donations and on a recurring basis. For only $1 a week, you can help us keep rolling here with every game pre- and post-game analysis, recruiting updates, interviews with media figures and players, and so much more. We don't put anything behind a paywall because we rely on your support and those of our sponsors. So anything you want to give us would be greatly appreciated. If you think the show is worth that, head on over to the Final Four is not on the schedule.com/support, or if you're lazy, tffinots.com/support to find the necessary links to support the show. Also a reminder that we'll be having the Beat Rod contest again this year, $100 gift certificate to Nudge Printing for the winner. All you have to do is predict the final standings of the Big Ten. We'll use the Big Ten tournament standings, all their tiebreakers and such. Teams 1 through 18, you get, for the tiebreaker, make sure you put down how many points Michigan State scores against Michigan this season, and they do play twice. And obviously put your name in there. And you can email to me at eric@tffinots.com. All right, so last season, Hoiberg finally got the breakthrough that he's been looking for and that we sort of semi-been predicting in Lincoln. Took his team to the NCAA Tournament for the first time in his tenure, and the first time since 2014, and yet in classic Nebraska fashion, they lost. They've never won the NCAA tournament. They ended up going 23-11 last year, 12-8 in the league. When they went to the tournament, they got wrecked by Texas A&M. They lost by 15 in the first round. I think it was closer, but late kind of Texas A&M pulled away. Maybe it was the second half or something. I'm trying to remember the game. It seemed like it was competitive for a while. They got there with being very, very improved, but much improved on both sides of the court, both offensively and defensively, and sort of becoming balanced for the first time. They shot real well on offense, and I think they actually rebounded okay, which is unusual for them in the past. They shot the 2s and 3s. They didn't turn the ball over a whole lot. Defensively, they were really good. They're 14th against 2s, which is easily the best that they've ever been under Hoiberg. And so now that they've won a little bit, now people are probably going to be expecting some more. You have them penciled in at 11 right now. But, what do you think for this team and certainly last season?
Well, I think it was good for Fred Hoiberg, obviously. I mean, I think Michigan State fans are sympathetic given that his son Jack played in the program. He was around the program during that year or two that he had, it might have only been 1 year, that he had off between his NBA coaching experience with the Bulls and then returning to college basketball to coach Nebraska.
Right.
It took him a while. Frankly, it took him far longer than I thought it would. I thought he was a great hire. And the reason I thought he was a great hire is his previous collegiate stop at Iowa State. He was pretty successful. And the particular method he used, he was way ahead of his time in this stuff. He was running a transfer factory at Iowa State.
Right.
And he was doing it in a pre-portal era, but he was really making use of a couple different things. One element was kind of the old school way, which is you have a guy transfer in, he sits out for a year. But he was doing that with players that, there was an opportunity there, and it made sense as kind of a fresh start kind of thing, the way it used to in terms of transfers. But the other way is he was also making use of grad transfers for a little bit of that time as well, which was instant eligibility for those guys.
Mm-hmm.
But he did that. And the reason I say that I'm talking about that and that it mattered is his Iowa State experience was similar to what a lot of programs are going through now, where basically every year you've got serious roster turnover, and that is a particular kind of skill. I'm not yet convinced it's a replicable skill from year to year. I think the jury's still out on that, as to whether there truly are guys who are just great at handling this year to year. I mean, people would have built up Eric Musselman, for example, because at Nevada and Arkansas, he had 6 straight years with similar kinds of roster turnover, and it always worked until last year when it really didn't at Arkansas. Yeah. So I'm not sure yet. But Fred Hoiberg had done very well with that kind of model at Iowa State. And so I thought, okay, that's good, because even though he's a guy with an NBA background and a name, having been a long-term NBA player, he was an elite college player at Iowa State before that. But even though he has a name, he had not been a guy at Iowa State that really built his program on the back of heavy-duty high school recruiting. It had been a lot of transfers, like I say. And I thought, well, in a place like Nebraska, you don't sit in a talent-rich region, so you're always kind of having to go away from home to get kids. Transfers are theoretically an easier road to go than trying to attract truly elite high school talent, And so I thought it made sense. And he had been a proven winner in the college ranks. Well, it had been an abject disaster until year before last. And if you remember, the real breakthrough, I think, with this program, even though it, again, involves some different personnel from year to year, was not this past season, but the year before that. They didn't make the tournament, but they had a really good Big Ten campaign, particularly down the stretch. They were really competitive, and I thought that they figured some things out. And you can't go too far with that because, again, there was a lot of roster turnover, but they also brought some key guys back. Tominaga was back. Gary was back. Some key guys on their team last year had been there the year before. And I think that carried over. And for the second year in a row, I think Hoiberg made some good, strong additions through the portal, guys who made sense. Earlier in his tenure there, it just didn't work. I mean, he was bringing in guys that just turnover crazy guards. They couldn't stop anybody, couldn't defend. It was just a bad mix. And that changed. The last 2 years, he's done a much better job in terms of identifying talent in the portal that's going to make sense, it's going to fit into what he wants to do, and that he can win with. And last year, it all, they built on the success down the stretch the year before and made it happen, got to the tournament, were 12-8 in the league. That's all. They were, I believe they were one of the teams that handed Purdue a loss, I think.
Yep. I think you're right. And
so impressive stuff. And if for that program where you don't take any of those things for granted, Michigan State fans take the NCAA tournament for granted, right? Nebraska, you can't. It has been a long time. The entire time they've been in the Big Ten, which is what, about 12 years now, 12, 13 years, something like that.
Feels longer than that, but maybe.
I want to say it was around 11 or 12 that they got into the league. So something like that. The entire time they've been in the conference, that was only the second time they've made the tournament. They made it once under Tim Miles and then once now under Hoiberg. So that's done. As you mentioned, they still haven't made the breakthrough of actually winning the game in the tournament. And that's not just Fred Hoiberg, and that's not just during their Big Ten tenure. That's for life. That's program history.
And they've been there a lot too. It's not like they've just been there twice.
A decent amount.
They've been there like 7-8 times.
Yeah, at least that many. Yes.
Yeah, but that's a lot of times to not win one.
It's a string, but that's the thing. Nebraska has, even in the years they've made it, they've never had a really great team. They've never had a team that was, this is a top 10 group. Everything really came together.
Right.
When they've made it, kind of the way they did last year. Yeah, it's a nice story. They're competitive. They're solid, but they're not really going out and dominating people. I'm not giving that as an excuse. I'm just saying it's not as if they've had great teams that have just fallen flat on their face when they get there. They haven't really yet been in a position where you expected them to go on a run, and they haven't.
I bet they haven't been higher than a 7 seed.
That could be. That would make sense. So the question becomes now, all right, you've done this, which they've done before, not a ton, so it's still a big deal, relatively speaking there. Can you build on this? Can you now start to think about winning a game once you get there? Can you get there 2 years in a row? Those are the things that are going to be tested now. And again, there's roster turnover. We'll talk about it. They lost some key guys. They brought in some interesting pieces, and they also bring back some interesting players. So it'll be an interesting year for them. I think they are capable of getting back to the tournament. Where I have them at 11, certainly you would not say is any kind of lock, and I don't see them as a lock by any means. But I think they can compete to get there, and if enough things break the right way, it might happen. But it's certainly we're in much better shape if you're a Nebraska fan than the way things looked even 2 years ago, where frankly it was starting to get to the point, and I know we talked about it here, that you had to wonder, is this just not working? Because the one thing you have to give credit to Nebraska for is they have not been shy in terms of spending on the program. Now, I can't speak to that in terms of NIL. I have not gotten any,
but as far as facilities,
of that stuff. And they have great fan support. Even when they're not winning, people show up. So, even at a place without, this is not Penn State. It's similar in terms of its tradition and in terms of its football orientation. But there is one big difference. And the big difference is this school actually visibly cares about wanting to succeed in basketball. They spend money to that effect. And at some point, you've got to either reward that or pull the plug. And so I think his having the year that he had last season, really was big in changing the narrative, because I think even at a place that's patient, it was starting to wear thin. I mean, I don't know, how many years has he been there now? It's several seasons. It's probably like 6 or 7 now. Which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, wow.
But he's been there a long time, and only now is finally starting to have some success, which also shows you that this stuff about, the portal being an instant gratification tool doesn't necessarily hold true for everybody. It still can take a while to get your bearings right. Even a guy who's kind of used to playing this way, it's taken a while. But for Hoiberg's sake and Nebraska fans' sake, they'll hope that they finally have turned a corner.
So, as notes of little facts here, he's been coached since 2019. Nebraska,
so 1920 was his first season?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he took over March 2019. So
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is year 6. Yeah.
Yeah. And Nebraska, as you said, joined in 2011. So very good. And finally, interestingly, 8 NCAA tournament appearances. They were, and in order, so in 86 they were 9 seed and lost. In 91 they were a 3 seed and lost to 14 seed Xavier.
Okay, so and there was a period where
they went 4 years in a row, 91, 92, 93, 94. In 94 they were 6 seed and they lost to Penn, and then every other they've been like 11, 8 seed, 10, 8 seed. Ones you would not say are big upsets.
They did have a period, and Tyronn Lue, who's a NBA head coach now, I know played there, might have been during that period that you're talking about, that string.
Mm-hmm.
They had some guys for a brief period there who could play. So that must have been it. I didn't realize they went 4 years in a row though, and that's a really good 4-year run. That must have been when Danny Nee was coaching them, who was a Digger Phelps assistant at Notre Dame. And
you are right.
Yeah, that all kind of makes sense. But what I was going to say is that era, you needed to be pretty solid. It wasn't going to be. It was still a 64 team era, but to go 4 years in a row in a league like the Big Eight, which was probably still the Big Eight in that period, they probably
maybe 10.
They probably had to be, fourth or fifth in that league, I would guess.
Sure,
at least. So,
that 1991 team had two NBA draft picks.
There we go.
Rich King and redshirt freshman Eric Piatkowski.
Piatkowski, of course, the Polish rifle. I remember him. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, they did have that period where they had some guys who could play, but very little besides that. The tradition is just a tradition of real success is just not there.
I was just going to say, I feel like with that Nebraska, in some ways, they're different, very different than Northwestern, but their recent history feels somewhat similar. Like you had hope that they're going to be something. And with Northwestern, Nebraska both brought in some really good recruits because didn't they have a 5-star? I'm trying to remember the name for Nebraska. He's a 5-star, wasn't he?
Oh yes, the guard, the wing, 2 years ago. Yeah, Byron.
Bryce, was it Bryce?
Bryce Thompson. Yes. No, anyway, not Bryce Thompson.
No, it wasn't Bryce Thompson.
Anyway,
yeah. But they had, and then they had, so both teams looked like they had some really good recruits, fell flat in their face, did not perform well. I think the same year we're talking about both coaches, it's earlier for Hoiberg's reign, but boy, Hoiberg and Collins, this is doesn't seem like it's going to work. And then both of them sort of the same time.
Yeah.
Kind of get things rolling. I mean, Northwestern a little bit more so, but anyway, in some ways they're similar trajectories.
I think that's true. I think both,
although just not related programs.
Both were in similar position where you could honestly look at it and say, well, is this working or not? Because it had not been, only 1 or 2 years. You had started to pile up, and in Nebraska's case, it was really bad because they had some awful teams. They weren't just garden variety bad. They were really, really stinking up the place. And to recover the way he has, that's a good sign. Now he's got to sustain it, though, which, as we've talked about, is kind of a similar challenge to what Chris Collins is facing. I think Chris Collins probably has a little more credibility baked in thus far. But, one more year out of Hoiberg could probably get him on equal footing to where Collins is, where they're not going to make a move if they have just an off year. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see, but it really is an interesting thing though with Nebraska historically, because you can say, well, it's football country and they don't have a ton of local talent historically they can draw from. Nebraska, not a big talent, not a big population base. It's not a big talent producer, but you look around kind of their peer schools for much of the 20th century, well, for all of the 20th century. Oklahoma had some very good teams in basketball over the years.
Yeah.
Kansas, one of the elite programs
Obviously,
of all time.
Right.
Yeah, Kansas State. There
Missouri
are the
while,
there are the old Missouris absolutely had good basketball teams.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really pass the smell test why Nebraska has not been able to figure it out. But that's the reality. So I mean, you could say they're right there, kind of nosing around with Northwestern and maybe Rutgers, although Rutgers does have one Final Four to its credit, and Penn State at the bottom of the conference in terms of tradition, but it doesn't stand to reason entirely as to why that's been the case, because Nebraska has had a very successful athletic department for a very long time, and they've been very good in other sports besides football. They've had good baseball teams. At times, I remember they used to, I'm not sure whether it's still the case, of a dominant women's volleyball program.
They're good now still.
Yeah, they've had some really good programs in that athletic department. So it just hasn't made sense, other than perhaps you could just say they just haven't historically been able to identify the right guy. And maybe Hoiberg has finally got himself in a spot where he is the right guy. We'll see.
Well, make sure you've got the right guy when you need your windows cleaned. To contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They can come out and take care of the inside, the outside of your windows. They can wash your house, and they get up on a ladder and they get close, and so they're not pounding away from 30 feet away. They're actually willing to get on the ladders, and something I'm not willing to do. They'll come in, they'll clean your blinds, your screens. They'll get things cleaner than they've ever been in your house for sure. Great pricing, super friendly people, and they can come out really any time of weather. In the middle of winter, although now it's nice, so this is a good time to have them come out. But you can head on over to our support page, thefinalfoursoutoftheschedule.com/support. There you can find ways to contact the team at Squeegee Squad Grand Rapids, which is a very large region. It's not just the city Grand Rapids. So contact them. They should be your first stop if you're looking to get your windows cleaned or your house washed. That is 15% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. And they sponsor the cleaning house segment of the teams here, and there are quite a few who are leaving in Nebraska. So we'll start with the biggest name, of course, is Keisei Tominaga, who you mentioned earlier. He was a showman. He was, if nothing else, he was a guy who really had crazy shots, but hit a lot of them, and really just was a guy who energized the crowd and really got people into the game. So he averaged 15 points a game last season, shot 47, 38, and 88. Also had the ability to get twos aside from just threes, which it was early in his career, which really changed his game and made him a lot more dangerous.
Yeah, and they'll miss him, not just for the production, which was certainly important the last two seasons, but and showed an evolving in his game, as you mentioned, but also as you said, the showmanship that he gave that program a personality. And that, as much as anything, has been what Nebraska has missed. You know, we think about Nebraska basketball just since they've been in the Big Ten. You can't think, and it can even be negative. I mean, you think about Wisconsin, you might think about somebody like Brad Davison. Well, okay, he was a piece of shit, but it gave them you had a sense of something about that program beyond the fact that they exist, right? And Nebraska basketball just hasn't had a lot of that, even when they've had good players, and they've had some good players since they've been in the Big Ten, some good individual guys. Tim Miles had some guys who could play over time. He had several of them, but they didn't really imprint themselves on your memory. I think anybody who's watched Big Ten basketball in the last 2 years has a definite impression of Tominaga because he was so unique as an offensive player. So they'll miss all of that. They'll miss that energy, the enthusiasm, the effort that he played with, and the fact that he became a pretty good three-level scorer. He wasn't just a freak show three-point shooter. He started to do other things very well also. So, definitely a loss.
And I can tell you, as someone who went to the Big Ten Tournament a couple of years, he was absolutely a crowd favorite. He's probably the most popular player. Just because, one, it's not like Sakiti was never popular except for, he just irritated everyone. But Tominaga was a fun guy to watch play just because he just loved the game and just was kind of crazy. So
that enthusiasm he played with, and, the fact that his shot selection was so off rhythm that you could never tell for sure when he was going to launch a shot, which created a problem for defenders, to be honest with you, because normally you have a rhythm and you understand, okay, this guy is not in a rhythm or in a position where he's going to take a shot, so you can relax a little bit. You couldn't ever do that with him because he would just, and you know what I'm talking about. Like if you're playing the game, even if you're watching the game and you're tuned in, you feel a rhythm, even if it's not explicitly conscious. You feel it, right? And Tominaga would screw with those feelings all the time because he would take shots in circumstances that nobody else would, and he'd make them often enough that it was a problem. It wasn't just, this guy's taking terrible shots and he's missing them because of that. He would take weird shots and hit them. And I can only imagine what it felt like to guard that guy because you truly never could relax. Yeah. If you wanted,
he kind of reminds me a little like Caitlin Clark. Caleb
yeah,
Clark
yeah,
at
yeah.
Iowa, just the deep shooting and
the
unpredictability,
other guy in recent Big Ten time, there's a couple names that come to mind. One that a long time ago that I wasn't as enamored of. There was this guy you probably may remember him. There's this guy named Chris Kingsbury who played for Iowa.
Oh yeah,
and
Iowa,
Chris
yeah.
Kingsbury would take shots from the timeline, the old timeline, and that's like 26 feet, whatever it was, long range. But even that didn't really get to where Tominaga did because, yeah, he would take long shots, but they weren't that out of rhythm kind of thing. The only guy I can think of in recent memory who had a sort of similar kind of game was a kid 2 years ago for Penn State, Andrew Funk.
Yeah.
That was pretty similar. And again, that guy made a lot of shots. He made enough that you really had to be on the edge of your seat guarding him, so to speak, at all times because you could never tell when he was going to pull. And he was capable of making them. So, yeah, you're a very unique player.
All right, so the next player we'll talk about is Josiah Alec, a 6'8" power forward transfer from New Mexico. He averaged 7.3 points a game and 5.4 rebounds a game, and ended up starting most of the season, about 27 games.
Yeah, he was, kind of a below the radar sort of pickup. I mean, New Mexico plays Mountain West, so high enough level, like mid-major plus, somewhere between mid-majors and high majors. But still sort of an under the radar kind of addition, but I thought he fit very well. And that was the thing about the crew that Hoiberg had last year. He brought in guys like this who aren't superstars, but they just did the kind of things that helped you win basketball games. And he didn't have enough of those guys in years prior. So a nice pickup for a 1-year addition. I mean, I think they'd love to have him back.
Oh, I think so. Where did he end up going?
He's done.
Did he just graduate?
He's out of eligibility.
Oh, he just graduated.
He was a fifth year. He was a fifth-year guy, so he's out of eligibility. I think they would love to have him for another year.
Next will be Jaron Coleman, 6'5" guard, transferred in from Ball State. He didn't really do much last year, just averaged 2 points a game in 12 appearances.
Yeah, and this is the other side of that. When you bring in these big, and we've and will talk about it with regard to a couple of teams in this conference, USC and Michigan, that are bringing in 9, 10, 11 guys.
Right.
When you're bringing in large portal classes, it's inevitable that some guys are just not going to fit. They're not going to work out. They're not going to play a big role, and that was the case with Coleman. The difference is that Nebraska, in years past, that was the majority of their class. The majority of the groups they would bring in weren't working out well. In the last couple of years, that's been at a minimum. It's been more conventional. Well, we bring in, 6 guys and 4 of them help us and 2 don't. That's okay.
Yeah, right. Then C.J. Wilshire, really good 6'5" wing, averaged 7.7 points a game on 45, 39, and 84 shooting. He actually was pretty good from outside last season, which was the big change.
Yep.
And he decided, just sort of like the trades that happened in the middle between 2 baseball games where the player just kind of walks across the other to the other dugout. They lost to Texas A&M, and then he signed with Texas A&M for this offseason to play next year.
Something tells me, and I haven't looked into it, but I look at that, and that screams NIL to me. Because he finally broke through. He had been a guy they had gotten from Xavier, actually. Started out at Xavier, and they got him from Xavier. And he had potential, but never seemed to be able to really break through in years prior. And that was mostly because his shooting held him down, which was supposed to be the strength of his game, right? Well, that turned around last year, and he was finally really productive for them. And then they lose him to Texas A&M.
Jamarcus Lawrence, 6'3" sophomore, averaged a little under 7 points a game on 42, 36, and 77 shooting. Started 21 games. He's going to be transferring to Rhode Island.
Yeah, that's a weird one. And maybe Rhode Island ponied up. And again, but that's an A-10 school, so you can argue that's a half level down. I don't think that was something that was forced, because Lawrence was really productive and had played a lot over his first 2 years. He played a lot as a freshman, especially later in the year when they had some injury troubles, and he stepped in, played very well. And then last season, he played consistently a bigger role and was pretty good. So again, without knowing a lot more about it, I can't imagine that was one where they were happy to lose him.
And then we have Blaze Keita, 6'11", big, averaged 2 points a game, 3.5 rebounds a game, played 21 games, and ends up transferring to Western Kentucky.
Yeah, you would say that's a level down, and it is, but Western Kentucky has often been a bit of a haven for big men in recent years, so I wonder if that was part of it. They liked him as a guy with potential as a big, and I think they thought he had a future, and he actually did play relatively regularly for them as last season went along. They liked him because he had a nice combination of size and some athletic burst as well to go with the size, but he opted to leave.
Next leaving player is Matar Diop, 6'9" forward, didn't play a whole lot, and he just transferred to Loyola Marymount, which I think tells a story there.
That's exactly right. When you see moves like that, it's more obvious what's going on. He hadn't been able to break through, didn't see a likelihood of doing that, so he goes down a level to a West Coast Conference team.
Yep, and this kind of explains the next player, Ramel Lloyd, 6'6" guard. He's transferred to Long Beach State after not really playing much.
Yeah, and he was a guy they actually were very excited about when they landed him. He was a borderline top 100 recruit, but it just hasn't panned out for him at Nebraska, so he too opts to go a level down.
Final transfer out is Eli Rice, 6'8" wing, averaged 4.2 points a game in 10 minutes, shot 41, 37, and 72, and he's heading over to Penn State, who we talked about earlier.
Yeah, interesting one. Again, you have to think there's something else going on because he actually did start to play a lot as the year went on, didn't play a ton early, played more and was pretty productive. And he transfers within the conference, so not a guy dropping down a level, just looking for a different opportunity. And, without knowing much more about it than that, I wouldn't imagine that was a guy that they were, just fine with losing the way sometimes you are.
Recruited over.
Yeah, I don't think it was that.
Well, we have a very short list as returning players. We'll begin with Bryce Williams, 6'7" senior, came in from Charlotte last year. He averaged 13.4 points a game and 5.5 rebounds, shot 44, 39, and 84.
Yeah, big addition. And when I talk about how the last couple of years, what's primarily changed for Fred Hoiberg is the guys he's added have actually fit, where they've fit, they've been competitive players. Bryce Williams, perfect example. This is a very good player. And they expected him to be because he'd been good at Charlotte. And he came to Nebraska, stepped right in, moving up the level from CUSA, no big deal. Was able to be a very productive player for them and should be that and more maybe this year. I mean, he particularly with Tominaga gone, I think it's safe to say he's clearly option one in their offense, and I think he'll be able to live up to that designation, that role. I would say, depending upon the team success that they have, he might even be a guy who's capable of contending for some level of all Big Ten recognition. He's that good.
Yeah. Well, another really good player is Juwan Gary, although he's banged up quite a bit. But he's 6'6", 220 pounds, senior power forward. He averaged a little over 11.5 points a game, 6 rebounds a game, while shooting 50, 31, and 68.
Yeah, another really nice portal addition 2 years ago. So he's entering his third year in Nebraska. They got him from Alabama. So he was a guy who I guess felt, and we know this about Nate Oates. Nate Oates will recruit over guys because he's always active in the portal, and he also adds high school players. It's not either or. So Juwan Gary got out of there and has been very productive when he's been healthy. As you mentioned, the one knock on him is that he hasn't always been able to stay out there. But when he's played, very productive, kind of modern, small ball 4 type. 6'6", but he's strong. He's athletic. He can rebound. He could score. Not a great three-point shooter, but enough that just enough you've got to respect him. But he's much better than that around the rim. So he's, again, another one of these guys that not necessarily a headline maker, but a guy who can do a lot of things that help you win games.
And then in something that Fran McCaffrey was unable to do, Fred Hoiberg managed to hang on to his son and not have him transfer off the team. So Sam Hoiberg, 6-foot guard, averaged 3.4 points a game on 38, 31, and 68 shooting. He was more of a phenomenon, I think, his freshman year. Last year he was just kind of a player who hustled, played hard, and definitely played well, but not a guy who's a huge game changer.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of role he was playing as they settled into last season is what they want, as opposed to what he was doing late in the season prior, where he was very productive. It worked, but I think there was something of a, playing out of his head kind of element to that. And I think what we saw last year is closer to who he actually is. So he's a guy that now has a lot of experience. He's proven to, occasionally be able to hit shots. And he can handle the ball well enough, get him into offense well enough. So he's not a liability, but he's also not a guy who really gives you a lot of advantages against most opponents in the league. So you want to use him in the right role. And I think the right role is as a depth piece. He's a rotation guy as opposed to we're going to play him 28 minutes a night.
Yep. And finally, Rink Mast, 6'10" center. He came over from Bradley from Missouri Valley the year before. He averaged 12.3 points a game, 7.5 rebounds. He shot 43, 33, and 84. He ended up getting surgery on his knee in May, which means he's out for this season. So he'll have to come back the following year.
Big loss. I mean, it's great for them next season that they'll have him back. But it's a big loss for this season because he was really productive. And they needed him. They needed somebody to fill that role. You talked about improvement in terms of rebounding. I think especially improvement in terms of their interior defense. He was all a part of that, and yet he was also able to be a very productive offensive player for them. So he gave them a bit of everything you want at that position. And to not have him this year, that's a big blow. And honestly, it was something that made me pause when I was thinking about where to put Nebraska. Now, I'm reasonably sold that they've done a decent job in trying to make up for his absence with some of the additions we'll talk about. But, let's put it this way, if he were in that lineup, I'd feel much more confident. I might even have him a slot or two higher.
Okay, before we go over the newcomers onto the Nebraska team, just to remind you that there are all kinds of new products coming on to Nudge Printing. Check out Gabe and Brittany, their store in Portland. You can go online at nudgeprinting.com. They have a tremendous selection of Michigan State apparel, both vintage and current logos. He's got hats, he's got hoodies, t-shirts, everything super comfortable, all custom made, all really high quality and great pricing. So head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. You get 20% off if you type in Final Four, just as one word, at the coupon code at checkout. And you'll notice as we go through these newcomers, a whole lot of Big Ten teams mentioned. So Nebraska scouring the Big Ten and stealing players. We'll begin with one of them. And of course, an almost impossible name to pronounce. Berkey Buick-Tencel, 6'9", 245-pound transfer from UCLA. Again, Big Ten country there. Averaged 4.5 points a game, 2.5 rebounds a game in about 60 minutes last year for the Bruins. He shot 39, 30, and 63.
Yeah, UCLA brought in a lot of foreign players last year, and we'll talk about that more when we get to UCLA, obviously. And it didn't really work. These were all guys that, or most of them, including this individual, were guys that were seen to have a lot of potential. They weren't grabbing foreign guys just to grab. These were guys that had played on, under 18, under 17 national team, that kind of stuff. And it just didn't work. UCLA missed the tournament for the first time under Mick Cronin. But this guy has talent. I believe he played for either or both the under 17, under 18 Turkish national teams, and was seen as a guy who can swing some between the four and maybe even play a little bit on the wing. Good versatility in his game, ability to shoot from range. There were, if I remember correctly, there were some injury issues with him early on, and there may have been some eligibility stuff as well. So that kind of served to hold him back a little bit. And once he got going, it was sort of up and down. But there's a lot of potential here. It won't surprise me if he emerges even as a starter at some point for Nebraska. So, and he's got a lot of eligibility. He's got 3 years. So
right.
That part, if you can keep him and develop him, that part is also intriguing.
Another Big Ten transfer is Aaron Eulis. Eulis comes over from Iowa. 2 years ago, he averaged 6.1 points a game on 40, 32, and 71 shooting. He actually came the year before, I suppose, because he was sidelined because of gambling charges. And we talked about that last year a little bit. He's not a loss that makes my wife the least bit sad. He averaged 2.1 points assists per game and 1.1 turnovers a game, which is not unusual for Iowa, although not great, actually, in some respects for Iowa.
Yeah, still, this is a guy who I think was showing some potential at Iowa late in his tenure. I think he played 2 years there, so I believe he's got 2 years to play. As you mentioned, he sat out last year because of his involvement in a gambling scandal at Iowa, but now he's eligible. That's been confirmed. So I expect him to contend for a starting role on this team because he has played a lot of Big Ten level basketball. And particularly with Tominaga gone and Lawrence as well, they can use some help. They can use some guys to eat up minutes in their backcourt. And I would say Eulis is a pretty good candidate for that kind of role.
And now another player we talked about recently, another Big Ten transfer, is Connor Sejan, 6'4", from Wisconsin, who was fantastic shooting as a freshman and horrendous last year. So he was originally averaging almost 36% from three, 12 points a game, and then just, the bottom fell out last year. So, as we mentioned before, we're talking about Wisconsin, a player who maybe just needs to get his confidence back. And so who's the real Connor Sejan?
Yeah, and I think this was actually a really good move by Hoiberg. You could almost, these aren't trades, but or free agent signings. I guess they are free agent signings in a sense, but this has the earmarks to me of a classic buy low kind of scenario because Sejan was so good as a freshman offensively. Now, he's got defensive issues, but offensively, he was really, really good as a freshman. And then last year, he was hurt, and he came back. Wisconsin had it rolling for a while with other guys. He wasn't hitting shots, which sometimes shooters will go through that. But I think all the circumstances really made it a worst-case scenario for him. And then he opted to leave. I'm not under the impression that Wisconsin necessarily wanted to push him out, but you can see why. I mean, his minutes declined, I think, by 20 a game. I believe he went from 27
playing at the end.
27 minutes a game as a freshman to 7 minutes last year. That's going to cause anyone to question their future in the program, right? And he's entering his junior year, so he's already in the back half of his career all of a sudden. So I get it. Nebraska, a good place for him to land because I'm not saying he's anywhere near the player that Fred Hoiberg was, but the profile isn't massively different. The size is similar. The games are similar. Fred Hoiberg was not seen as a defensive stopper in his time, but he was a guy who hit shots. And Connor Sejan has demonstrated he's capable of doing that at the Big Ten level. Can they get his confidence back on track? I think there's a decent chance of that happening. So as I say, I think it's actually a great move on the part of Fred Hoiberg because you're getting a guy who's going to be very motivated to prove doubters wrong. And he's staying in the same league, so he's got familiarity with how the Big Ten operates. So that's a positive. And again, Nebraska can use some guard help, as I mentioned a minute ago. So it all sort of fits together. And, if it doesn't work, they do have some other possibilities they can turn to. But I like the addition.
Yeah, and it's obviously good for Esigen as well. That
Yeah,
he gets
there's an
to stay at
opportunity.
the same level,
Absolutely.
right? He's not like going down to the Missouri.
He knows
Mountain West
he
or something
knows
like
the
that.
league, and yeah, he gets to stay at the high major level, and I think he has to look at it as a clear path sort of opportunity to reestablish himself as a player in the Big Ten.
Another Big Ten player, Gavin Griffiths, 6'6" wing, who played last year at Rutgers. He shot, averaged 5.8 points a game on 32, 28, and 60 in about 18 minutes a game. So not a great shooting effort, but, again, is this a location thing or sort of just change the environment? Maybe things will get better.
Interesting one, because I don't think Rutgers wanted to lose him. He was a highly regarded recruit last season. Definitely a top 75 guy. I think some people might have even had him in the top 50. And his strength was reportedly shooting. Well, that didn't pan out, but that happens enough with freshmen who come in with reputations as good shooters. And then they're dealing with being defended by much better athletes, much better schemes. The shot windows are shorter. A lot of things change that can affect guys. And it can take a year for shooters to adjust. I mean, I think that happened with the kid at Iowa, both Sandforts actually, because even the elder one struggled as a freshman, as I recall, and they both came in with reps as shooters. It happens all the time. So I don't look at last season's performance as any kind of statement on Griffith's potential down the line. I think he could actually be productive. I mentioned, I don't think Rutgers wanted to lose him, but it happened. And Rutgers, they felt really good, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit, but they're bringing in, as some people may realize, an elite freshman recruiting class, by far the best they've ever had in school history. But they also liked the fact that they had the makings of a nice core of returning players around those guys. And then some of those pieces opted to leave. Griffiths was one of those. I think Steve Peichel, I have to believe, looked at him as, okay, he had a year to get his feet wet, get his sea legs, and now we're bringing in this high-level talent. He can be a veteran who kind of steadies the ship and benefits from playing with those guys as well. Didn't happen. He goes to Nebraska, and again, similar, and not exactly the same scenario as Esigen, but similar enough, where I think he's going to be given an opportunity. His size at 6'6" means he gives you a little bit of versatility. He's not really any kind of form man, but it's nice to have a wing with that kind of size for certain kind of matchups. And I think there's a chance that he finds his offensive game and becomes productive for Nebraska. So again, I think a very reasonable kind of addition for Fred Hoiberg. Too much in the past, in his early years at Nebraska, he was taking JUCO guys, or he was taking flyers on guys from lower levels where you weren't sure about the translation. You look at this now, and as you've said, Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten. You feel that that's a safer bet, that you're going to get some reasonable level of production out of guys like that, even if it's not superstar stuff.
Okay, so the next newcomer, who is as a shooter is better, Raleigh Worcester, 6'1" point guard. He transferred in from Utah. He averaged a little under 10 points a game and 5.5 rebounds a game 5.5 assists per game to just 1.9 turnovers a game. He shot 41, 28, and 71.
Yeah, he and Ulis, I think, are the two potential answers at point guard. Ulis, I think, is capable of playing off guard as well, and probably will. I think this is likely your starter at the point, because he's done it at the high major level, playing for Utah in the Pac-12. You like that. You really got to like the assist and turnover numbers. You'd like a little better if he was more of a proven jump shooter, but you'll take what you can get. And I think the fact that they have somebody who's run an offense efficiently and also been a decent enough scorer that he's a threat, that's a nice combination for Nebraska. And so, again, I think this player really heightens the floor for Nebraska.
So next up, we have Andrew Morgan, 6'10", 235-pound transfer from North Dakota State. He averaged 12.9 points a game and 5 rebounds a game while shooting 56, 36, and 70. And now that Mass is out for the year, I guess we expect him to play a little bit bigger role.
Very much so. And, North Dakota State, you're coming from the Summit, so you're never certain about how all of that translates. But I think they're reasonably optimistic that he can at least be a part of the answer. The thing you like is that he's got legit Big Ten size, and yet he's also shown an ability to stretch defenses. That's a nice element to have. So I would definitely expect Morgan to play. No question about that.
And final pilfer from a Big Ten school, Braxton Mia, 7'1", 250-pounder from Washington, averaged 5.5 points a game, 5.3 rebounds a game, and started about half the games for the Huskies. He shot 77% from the floor, but only 49% from the line. So unless he's inside the basket, I imagine he's not very good shooting.
Yep. And that's the other part of the equation. I think, again, the good news is, unlike Morgan, he's actually played at the high major level. So you can feel reasonably okay that what he does will at least translate at more or less at the levels he did at Washington, which would mean that you've got a guy who's capable of maybe playing, 18, 20 minutes a night and being decently productive. I don't see star kind of stuff out of him, but the hope is that these two guys combined will be able to at least approximate respectable center play.
Sure. And not to be forgotten, we have some freshmen high school recruits. So Nick Janowski, 6'3" combo guard from Wisconsin. So Nebraska snatched him from the Badgers. He shot 44% from 3 during his high school career. So, translate that. That's valuable.
Yeah, and I think given that the guys they've got coming back and the guys they've added, unlikely to play a big role, but the caveat to that is he was an effective shooter in high school. If that happens to translate, and if, say, a Sejan struggles again, maybe there's an opportunity there, but I would expect this is a developmental year for him.
And finally, Braden Frager, 6'6" forward from the hometown of Lincoln. He's an athletic wing who decided to stay home.
Yeah, again, similar deal. I don't expect huge opportunities for him to play, but you never know with ineffectiveness or injuries. Maybe something opens up. But as of now, I think it's a developmental year for both of the incoming freshmen.
Well, of course, the player that other teams need to keep down for the year and keep in the gutter, brought to you by the Brothers Suggested Gutters. Who would you say that is for Nebraska next season?
I think it's pretty clearly Williams.
Bryce Williams.
Yeah, I think so. He's the leading returning scorer, and I could easily see him, ticking up that scoring average up to the 17, 18 point a game range, and it wouldn't surprise me. I think he's a versatile offensive player. He's going to be the guy they look to get the ball to, and I think he's capable of delivering at a good clip once he does get it. So I would be surprised if it was anybody other than him who emerged as the top scorer. Mast would have been a decent second option, or possibly guy who could possibly steal that a little bit if he were healthy. But given what's happened with him, I think it's pretty clearly Williams.
Yeah, and as a reminder, the Brothers Suggested Gutters do just gutters, and that's all I do. They do fantastic work. They do some other gutter-related stuff, like if you want to turn one of your underneath your deck into a room, you can bring the outdoors to indoors, and that's a great way of put this under ceiling on, so it can add an extra room to your house and can add some real value. Also, although I hate to mention it, if again, winter's not that far away, they can install heated gutters. So if you have trouble with ice buildup or problems with snow building up on your gutters, they can take care of that, so that we get rid of that problem. As an addition to putting in leaf guards, clean them out, repair them, replace them, whatever you need to do, whether it's a commercial or residential, the Brothers Suggested Gutters will be the ones you should turn to. You can find them on the east and west side of the state. You can go to our support page and click the link to get an estimate from either Kurt or Greg, depending where you live. Again, that's Brothers Suggested Gutters, and our support page, the Final Four, is on theschedule.com/support. So bring us home here overall for the Huskers. Obviously, losing Mass is a loss right now. But as you mentioned, they've got some good pieces. They've got some interesting, intriguing pieces coming. And, how this team, can they repeat and make it back to the tournament? You have them slotted at maybe. at number 11.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair spot for them to be, because while it's nice having guys like Williams and Gary in particular back, you've got a lot of other spots, key spots, that you're going to have new players in. And so you just never know how that combination is going to work, particularly at point guard and at the 5. That's where there are real questions. I think there are reasons to think that they can find answers, but until you see it, you don't really know for sure. I think one thing that helps here is, as we talked about, a lot of guys with Big Ten experience.
Yeah.
That are in this group of newcomers. A lot of them. What are they, like 5?
5, 6, I think,
you're counting, right. You're counting UCLA and Washington in that, of course. But but still, high major experience. And then the guy from Utah, their point guard, who played in the Pac-12 as well. So really, I think Morgan is the only guy who's a transfer up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
Everybody else had high major experience. I think that is a lesson that Fred Hoiberg seems to have taken from his experience in the portal era, is that bringing guys in who have high major experience. I mean, he hasn't exclusively done that. Moss didn't have that. They've had some other guys in the last couple of years who weren't high major guys previously, but I can't help but think that that's not a coincidence, that was to some extent an objective, is bring in guys who at least know what it's like to play at this level. And some of those players, as we've talked about, Sejan, Griffith, the kid from UCLA, they coming off disappointing seasons, but they're higher ceiling guys than what they showed last year. So you're bringing in guys who know what it's like to play at a high level, but yet you also feel like there's a real chance for growth in Lincoln out of them as players, and they could be much better than they were a season ago at their previous school. So that's what the hope has to be. I like the potential of this team if a decent number of things break the right way. I don't think everything has to be perfect for them to be a tournament team, but obviously they need to find competent point guard play. They need to at least be respectable at the 5. And if they get that, that's probably enough that this is a team that can think about getting back to the tournament, maybe finding a way to do some damage for once when they're there. But they're like a lot of other teams. It's very iffy because you're relying so much on projecting new guys into new roles, and you just don't know how these combinations are going to come together
for sure
until we see it.
Yeah. Well, and I think, one thing for Hoiberg too, in the sense now that he's getting these high major transfers, it's an easier environment in some respects, because it's, before, the amount of players into the graduate transfers you can find, there weren't nearly as many who are going to be high level. And now, of course, with the way things are, it's a, hodgepodge. There's thousands of players who are available.
That's absolutely true. You didn't have that option available to you with the same level of ease. Most of your grad transfers tended to be transfer up guys. There's definitely some truth to that. And if they weren't, they tended to be guys that didn't have huge upside because you played 4 years at another high major school and you kind of know what they are. Well, with the Sejan and Griffiths, guys like that, you don't know yet fully what they can be. And there's reason to think that they could actually be pretty good players when all's said and done. So that's a good point. It may not have been an option that was as readily available for him, but I think it's smart. It's a calculated gamble. It's taking a look at the circumstances, saying, okay, what gives me the best odds of actually getting some production out of new players? And I think that's a pretty decent path to take, to say we're going to concentrate on bringing in guys who have at least gotten a taste of what it means to play at this level.
Yeah.
And then just hope that you get some continued upside out of them.
Sure. Yeah. So, all right. Well, we'll keep slugging our way through the Big Ten. We're not quite halfway. We still have 10 left.
Yeah.
And so,
We've not that long ago, we'd be coming into the home stretch, and we're not even halfway.
So,
there.
hey, this is some serious dedication. I want everyone out there to appreciate it. We appreciate you listening and hanging with us and getting excited for the Big Ten.
Add it up. Add all of these previews together, and I have to believe we're going to come close to the 24-hour mark. That's just the talking time.
Right.
That's just the episodes, not including the prep time. So yeah, I'm not crying here.
No,
don't get me wrong. It's fun to do, but yeah, it's a lot of man hours.
Unfortunately, if you're able to listen to us at 1.5 speed, it's only 18 hours listening. So there you go. There's your bright side. All right. So until next time, with the number 10 team, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here, continue our march to the Big Ten. Today, we continue with an up-and-coming Big Ten team, the number 12 Nebraska Cornhuskers. Now that Hoiberg has taken the Huskers to the promised land, can he make a run?
Is it, hold on, Eric,
Yeah.
Is it 12 or 11?
They're 11 is what I have.
They're 11. You just said 12.
Oh, did I really? Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
It's even written 11 on my screen. Man, I tell you what, it's rough getting old here, man. All right, we'll try it again. All right.